It was 2017 when Matt Stein, an environmental engineer from Stanford, started and sold a company in the span of just 24 months. It was a whirlwind. Matt had 3 young kids and he had a difficult time juggling his non work priorities. Matt realized he needed some direction, so he hired a coach to help guide him. His coach told him to explore a method called the Wheel of Life. List all your categories, she said: family, work, friends. Soon you'll realize how this process can help you find your desired personal balance. Matt customized the method, combining other tools into an app sheet, and this was the seed of what has become a great app called Whee.li. Hi, Matt. Hi, Hector.
Hello.
Nice
Hey, Matt.
to see
Yeah, good to see you all.
Matt, tell us a little bit more about this journey, this story that you started, about some personal exploration, different tools, where you were at this time, and how you started building something just to use for yourself.
Yeah, I've always experimented with a lot of different tools and techniques when it comes to setting goals and keeping some balance in my life. I've tried countless to-do apps and apps that like tally and count stuff and paper journaling methods. Beyond building Whee.li, the things that have really had some, I'd say, staying power for me are just simple things, right? Like calendars and Google Keep and Google Tasks, and using paper journaling. Actually, it was interesting. Before I started Whee.li, I tracked all my yearly goals in like various to-do apps, and I kept my memories, and like I did paper journaling all the time. But one of the things that led me to create this app was the fact that, at the end of the year, I always like to kind of reflect back on what the prior year was like. And, I realized everything was all over the place and all these journals and stuff. And that was one of the inspirations. Like, what if I could just have a more organized way of thinking back on my prior year to give me what I needed to set myself up for really great next year? But there are a lot of other, inspirations for Whee.li as well.
What would you say Whee.li has become today? Who is it for? What does it do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think back to my younger self, right? Like 6, 7 years ago. And, as you said in the intro, I was a person who I've always been a very achievement oriented person, right? For better or worse, that's who I am. But I realized that just being achievement oriented in and of itself, it's kind of dangerous, right? Because you end up like really latching on to one thing. In my case, it was my profession, at the expense of so many other things that if you play a good, rich life out, right? Those other things, family, friends, your hobbies, right? Oftentimes they take back seats. So, that was the situation I was in. And I know a lot of my friends have been in this exact situation. I know that there are a lot of other folks out there that are in that same situation. So when I think about who this app is for, my first thought goes to those people, but I know it can help like a whole range of other types of people as well.
Sure. We'll talk a little bit more about where you were before, what inspired you, and how you crafted it. But just so that people listening are clear, we now have this gorgeous app that has a collection of tools that the teams have designed to record, to measure, and to refine the approach to achieving personal goals, different categories of life goals, and replacing bad habits. So I think the key thing that this product can help users do is define their life categories, set some goals, capture some important moments, measure their progress, and then create a feedback loop. Do you think that's a fair explanation of what we can do with it?
I do.
Good.
I like to boil it down into 3 things, which are pretty similar to what you described. And by the way, a lot of this comes from, I really went down the rabbit hole with a lot of skill development material. We're living in like a golden age of behavioral change research, whether it's, researchers at universities like Katie Milkman, Angela Duckworth, or other folks that have written books or podcasts. There's Tim Ferriss, Shane Parrish.
Yeah.
There's so much material out there. But after I went down that rabbit hole and I digested that stuff for like 2 years, right? You start to see the patterns, and it comes down to, one, like setting the right goals, two, reflecting on how you're doing and what you're learning, right? As you try to achieve those goals, and three, tracking progress, right? And to your point, it is those feedback loops. It's just constantly thinking through these things. And then, after doing that for a while, I realized like you can kind of turn these knobs a little bit and be very deliberate how you live on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Would you have called yourself a product person before embarking on this journey?
Kind of, sort of. I've spent many years of my life in enterprise analytics. So I'd say I'm very comfortable when it comes to software products and business models for big corporates, right? So like dashboards, ROIs, quantification, value props, those kinds of things. On the consumer side, though, while I am a user of a lot of consumer apps, I had zero experience creating.
Yeah.
So
What I hear you
by everything that's involved in going into,
what I hear you sharing, it sounds so interesting to my ears, is that you were looking for patterns across multiple tools that you benchmarked against. And then you started building out a minimally viable product using different tools like Google Sheets and AppSheet and different habit tracking tools, and then started tweaking and refining and iterating on this product. That at its simplest is kind of the process for crafting a real minimally viable product. Wouldn't you say, Hector?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, this is what I was about to ask, right? Like, how was the moment? Because I think that every venture starts either through a rabbit hole or through an experience directly in your daily job, right? Like you're working on something and you did spot an opportunity. But how was, or do you remember that moment where you were doing through the research, understanding patterns and that, trying to find the tool to use and suddenly saying like, well, maybe I have to build it. I mean, there's nothing specifically to this. Do you have that realization, or just like, okay, maybe there is something that I really want to build it?
Yeah, I do remember it. And, it was a little bit of a process, but they were probably punctuated with specific moments. I used a no-code app for almost 2 years to start tracking, how I was doing around my different categories and so forth. And it was a great process, right? Because, it helped me understand what data I needed to input, how often I needed to input, what I would do with that data. But what I kept finding was that, I had the app on my phone, but I kept going back to the G Sheet, which was at the time, the Google Sheet was the back end of the app. Yeah. I mean, it was great. I had all the data right there. I could just play with it. I could create like different charts, visualizations. But I had a very hard time translating that back into the codeless app. I'm sure things have progressed a lot since then. And then there were other ideas that I had about visualizations that I didn't even know how to execute on, honestly. And I mean, if you remember, that was part of the early conversations between us. I remember. How do I make a wheel that moves? Because that's pretty cool, because it's not just a static wheel of life. It's always changing for all of us. So, that was like one of the big concepts. And I remember going on walks with my brother, who is in the computer space, and like asking him and looking up all these visualization code libraries, and I just like couldn't find what I was looking for. So
yeah, that's actually, I mean, that opens the conversation to something interesting, right? Like want to try what I would say that in some way how everything is evolving recently, like the MVP has to be a prototype, and actually what you build with this no-code tool probably is the MVP, because it's something that you just put together as fast as possible, as cheap as possible in order to test it. And what we created together probably is a little bit beyond, right? It's more about the minimum marketable product or the minimal perfect experience, right? So it's interesting to see both levels and probably how no-code tools can help us with the MVP process, but rapidly, maybe if it's not a super performative tool just solving a specific thing, how you feel that there's a limit, right? And that you want to go a little bit beyond, especially on the experience side, right? On the design side, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest mental shift, and I remember, Hector, when I first approached Z1 and we started having initial conversations, you asked me, Matt, how strong are your opinions on this product? And I guess I didn't really understand where that was coming from initially, but I have a much deeper understanding of why that was such an important question, was because, I had this workflow that I was used to working on. And, I just kind of assumed that, hey, if it worked for me, it would work for a bunch of other people. But then when we shifted into kind of beta testing, I realized, because I asked people, hey, do this action, like, we were working together on Zoom, do this action, accomplish this task on the app, right? Like create a moment. And then I saw some people would do it really quickly and others would kind of fumble through and struggle. And, so it's like understanding that people are coming to this app for the first time, and how do you remove all of your preconceptions or what have you to think about that first user and that first experience.
Right. I remember we took a really iterative approach to crafting this product. We went slowly in small milestones. And after the first design milestone, you took your time to validate this product, I guess, get out of your own echo chamber.
Yeah.
And you did some work on LinkedIn and
Yeah.
writing articles and just collecting feedback from people who didn't know you and didn't have to be kind. Can you share a little bit more about those activities you did?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I put the word out there a little bit on LinkedIn. I ended up recruiting probably a dozen or so people to just go through this, process. If I recall, the first deliverable was a high fidelity prototype in Figma.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, that process was just so humbling, right? In asking someone to kind of work through this workflow, but it was very valuable. I remember coming out of that process with a whole list, of just comments that I was just like dropping inside of the Figma app. And we need to change this. We need to kind of smooth out this interaction. People don't know what this button's for. And, a lot of just small details that, frankly, I obviously use consumer apps all the time, but I just didn't have an appreciation for the thoughtfulness that really needs to go into all of those tiny details.
You'd never used Figma before. Is that true?
I had not at the time.
Right.
Since then, I have used it quite a bit.
We have to say that at the time that we started working together, Figma was not the behemoth that it's right now. I mean, it was actually some sort of outsider in the design.
I remember it was some of the functionality was a little less than it is today, and it's really smooth today. So it was a great tool to use.
Yeah, it was a great bet by our design team, and finally it's evolved as a product, but also it has impacted our design process as well, right?
Yeah.
This is not a paid sponsorship. However, this is an interesting topic because, Hector, some people come to us and have never used any of these collaboration tools, and we work pretty well asynchronously across teams through our tools, just really rapidly. I mean, you could take out the name Figma if you want to, but what have you observed with people who are not design oriented or technical, and we try to help them through this learning curve of starting to use Figma with us?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's true that probably a problem that we usually have when providing services is that you are very used to the tools that you're using, that you assume that everyone is using the same tool set, right? And when it comes to a collaboration, you assume that they know how to use everything, like not pay the sponsorships, but Notion, Jira, Slack, the common stack nowadays, right? With Figma and everything. So it's important to, at the end of the day, the same, like think that tools are tools, and tools is something that we use for an outcome, right? And never forget why we're using something. And if we're sharing a prototype through Figma, with Matt, for example, is because we want him to play with the prototype and provide feedback, not because we want him to enjoy Figma, right? And that's the thing, or to show off, right? Like sometimes it's like, oh, look at this super trendy tool that we're using. Honestly, sometimes it's better to use like Google Sheets, like as you said before, right, Matt? Like sometimes it's better to find the right tool for the specific goal. In this particular case, like Figma, as we used to use before other tools, it's better in terms of communication, visualization, and feedback loops, right? And also prototyping, right? But at the end of the day, it's also important, like to not be very heavy on the tool set. It's more think about why you're using specific things and what's the goal right behind it.
So you had comments from the team and from other users in Figma. There were messages in Slack, but this was something that you were crafting off the side of your desk. You were not all in with your time. You had a full-time, high-level executive career already.
Yeah.
What was that experience sort of managing the balance of your time and attention?
It's tricky. It can be done. This is an important priority for me, but I had to set some boundaries at the same time, right? I think that, for me, two things, right? One, I've tried really hard to keep my Whee.li focused work outside of my work hours, right? So, which generally means early mornings, late nights, or weekends. And two, I've tried to keep it to no more than, say, 4 hours a week, which is tough, right? In the process that we went through, there are certain kind of peaks, right? Like the beta testing or when the development cycle starts, right? Like those times were a little bit more demanding on my time. So either I'd kind of push some hours out to the weekend, or when my weekend hours started kind of encroaching on my family time, I might even set up like just a PTO day for work to focus on. So it's tricky, but it can be done.
And the team, I imagine, was fairly supportive about the length of feedback loops, or maybe gently nudging you when you weren't available right away.
I think so. I mean, it's a two-way communication, right? I mean, I think that I've tried to be really transparent with the Z1 team, just in terms of, like, hey, guys, I'm not going to be able to get back to you this week because I'm really busy focused on my day job. So I'll get back to you over the weekend. But yeah, of course, again, there are times like I think when we were going into development, or even when we were working through, getting the app up on the App Store, there were some time sensitive questions that I think the Z1 team was great about just saying, hey, Matt, time sensitive thing. We just need a yes or no answer. We need you to weigh in. Here are the pros and cons of this decision. So I think there was just a really good kind of communication loop there.
This is not a paid sponsorship by Z1, but I want to add something. But I think it's very important when we're thinking or rethinking about our positioning or vision as a studio. I think this is very important. Like, firstly, to be empathetic, right? Like, it's something that I always try to highlight, right? Like, every time that we're working with someone or a team building a new experience, we have to understand the context, right? We are in different parts of the world with different schedules, different lifestyles sometimes. So it's important to understand for the good or the bad, right? Sometimes it's the opposite. Like I remember the opposite as you, Matt, like working with the typical startup for people living in the same flat, working 40 hours a day, right? And that was definitely also different, right? So the things that, the same as we were saying before, like focus on the outcome and also focusing on how to be helpful, right? And in this case with you, to be helpful was to not giving you a lot of noise. It was more about, okay, this is not a priority. Just take your time, but this is a priority. We're blocked. And also something that we always try is to be as much time as possible unblocked, right? Like trying to move forward with the things that we're confident that are needed, and not always having that passive attitude on blocking for everything. And, oh yeah, Matt, it's not available, we cannot do it, right? It's like, no, you actually can do things while the client is coming back, because sometimes it's not just a matter of availability. It's also about decision making or more information needed or something like that. So it's important to think about how to be helpful, right?
Yeah, no, it's been a great working relationship. I think maybe because of the time constraints that I set on myself, and because we wanted to go through a really good process, it took a long time. But you know what? Like, something's got to give in the equation, right? And for me, it was like I didn't put any firm constraints on this thing has to be launched by a certain date, and I'm really happy of that, because you get sort of to this first finish line, and I'm really pleased with where we ended up. And of course, it's going to continue to iterate, but so it's an equation. Like, how long is this going to take? How much pressure am I going to put on myself? Like, those kinds of things.
Sure. Too bad we didn't have an app where you could list different categories of risk and time investment and make those decisions for yourself.
I'm
But
writing a note down right now.
I speak to a lot of people daily who are so much like you as a persona. I'm delighted for where your journey has taken you, but especially in this time post-pandemic of quiet quitting, a lot of people who have 2 feet in something already have ideas or dreams about, I wish I could craft something on my own, and not really knowing where to go with it. I think it takes a tremendous amount of trust and also bravery to invest out of your own pocket, to choose some people while you're on your own. You have no team, you have no co-founders just yet, and evaluating different options. I remember when you and I first met, I believe you told me that you had posted something on Upwork and were sort of courting an engineer out of Russia, perhaps. And then you also had spoken to a massive world-class design agency.
Yeah.
And then I believe you found us maybe through a comment on another podcast. So this is a big step of, gosh, where am I going to put my pennies and with who? And how do I even find out what's available to me? Do you recall those evaluations that you were making?
Absolutely. I think my initial hypothesis was exactly what you said. It was, well, I'm going to hire a bunch of contractors on Upwork, maybe a designer, maybe someone to build the app. I thought it would be less expensive. But I also knew at the same time that I would have to kind of bridge the communication between all these folks, versus kind of a shop that had all of those disciplines or capabilities under one roof. And I went to a big firm and quickly realized that probably wasn't the right fit. When I met Z1, it was like the whole philosophy of 0 to 1. In my case, it was like, I don't know, 0.3 to 1. Like, that resonated with me. And I wanted to go through the process in a good, rigorous way, because that was a part of the experience for me as well, right? Like, learning this process. And then, the building trust piece is pretty key. And I just got the sense in the very early days that my success was the firm's success, and that felt good. And when we started looking at the app sheet that I had built, that very early prototype, there was like immediately all this like riffing and idea sharing. I was like, whoa, this is cool. This is fun. So it was ultimately probably those like intangibles that, you could set up all kinds of like decision matrices for who you're going to work with, but it was like those intangibles that I think convinced me that this was a right sort of move to have a really good partner.
And we did make some plans around each milestone around specific budget constraints that you could tolerate to get you to the next step. Yeah. Can you recall, did those influence the decisions you were making or any sacrifices you had to make?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I can think of a couple of situations. One was, where to store the data, right? Should we store it on a user's phone, or should we, haul it back to a cloud service like Firebase or something like that? And, it was cheaper, ended up being cheaper to put it, store it on someone's phone. And then that had the benefit also of like, this is an app where people share very personal information, right? So that's a trust builder, especially in sort of this day and age where, unfortunately for some apps, like the user doesn't really know where that data could theoretically ultimately land, right? So that was just, one example. I think of another example, which was, should we build cross-platform or just for us? And, it turns out it's a little bit cheaper to build for a single platform. And you get better functionality when you plug into like a native Swift versus doing, the cross-platform. But the trade-off is that now you've limited your universe of potential subscribers. So I think like some of those trade-offs, we talked through the pros and cons of doing those things. And, the team was really like a wealth of knowledge, and that was very comforting and just helpful to make a good decision.
Yeah, I remember going through giving you pros cons about whether we should consider building in React or Swift. And one of your priorities was how animated we could make the wheel, which influenced which framework we chose. Do you recall this decision?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hector, and maybe Hector, you can tell us a little bit more about what's the difference between choosing React or Swift, and what are the pros and cons?
I mean, it's something that we did from the early days in the studios, to not being just like a full service, right? Like using all the frameworks out there. It was more about, doing some research from the early days, and something that we update from time to time, and based on our experience, to choose the best frameworks to build products, right? Also for us, but also for our clients, and how they can scale up the product down the line, right? So for the mobile experiences that we are right now very experienced in React Native for multi-platform, or native versions, right? Swift or Kotlin for each platform. And at the end of the day, rarely it is a technical decision. It's more about a product decision. It's about the features that you want to add, that are tied to the limitations or strengths of each platform or each framework, but also the go-to-market strategy, right? And the profile of your users and clients, and even the brand sometimes. Like we have worked with people that they want to just release on one of the platforms aligned to the brand that they want to create, and the profile of their users, right? So in this specific product, finally, like when you are analyzing that, okay, we want to have some specific interactions that are more difficult to be built with React Native or Swift. I mean, that decision, if we understand that this is a critical part of the product and will be important for the success of the product, I mean, that's actually a very informed decision, right? Like how to drive technology in terms of the value that we want to bring to the user. Because if we remember that Matt was very opinionated about that, like it was important to have that feeling. And actually, now that you mentioned before, Matt, about all this research from the last years about, cognitive science and behavioral and all these spaces that right now we're gathering a lot of information, more and more the experiences that we're building can be connected to our habit-driven lives, or brain connections, and even on how we perceive these experiences, right? So probably years ago, or in a different market, it makes no sense to make a decision based on a design, this design feature that you want to create, that in some specific spaces or markets can be differential, actually, how you convey the actual input of 3 numbers. That can be 2 worlds, depending on how you create the experience of doing it, right? So I think more and more is important to understand that, always from the point of view of the user, that at the end of the day is who we want to help, right? Because sometimes, or probably in the early days of the technology space, usually the decisions were made by technical decisions only, right? And now we have to think always about the value, and then trying to find the balance, but always thinking about the end experience that we want to bring. Yeah.
Matt, were you intimidated by this conversation with super technical people? I know you're very research oriented. So how hard did you lean in trying to understand these frameworks versus just trusting what the team was proposing?
I think I asked a lot of questions. I also think I kind of, when I came on board, I was like, brace yourself. I'm probably going to ask a lot of questions. But as I kept asking questions and it kept getting deeper, I know my place. There's a certain point where, I trust the technical team, to make the right decisions at a certain level, so, but it's more honestly personally, it's just out of curiosity, to understand. And once you get a sense that, yeah, these folks are making really good decisions, then it's like, okay, I don't need to know all of the details anymore. So, but it's just a great educational process in general. And, I feel like if I went down this road again, I'd have a really good kind of mental framework of what to expect and the different milestones and so forth.
Well, Whee.li is live and in the wild. Can anybody find it?
Yeah, you can just go on the App Store and download it. I've already gotten some subscribers. I don't know where they came from, but that's exciting. It's going to launch on Product Hunt in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And I'll be just putting out some, stories and things on LinkedIn.
Well, you know what they do often say is, just because you build it doesn't mean they will come. However, it sounds like some already are coming.
Yeah.
Do you have?
I'm not sure that's. Yeah.
You'll be promoting it at all Thanksgivings and Christmases coming up. Do you have a plan of some kind to acquire users and to promote?
Yeah, I think, fingers crossed, things go well on Product Hunt. It was funny when I did the private beta, I had like 50, 60 people trying the app out for 4 weeks, and I could see the usage data on the back end. Mm-hmm. And there were some people that were using it like 30 sessions a week. And, those are the kinds of people that I just want to make sure kind of get the first bite at the apple and get the chance to use it, because I love listening to them and their ideas and what can be improved and so forth. So that'll be a piece of it. And then, beyond that, honestly, for anyone that's listening, I'm actually really quite open to other ideas to promote the app. But again, it all has to sit within the context of, I do have a day job, and that is my primary professional focus. So anything that can be really high impact, but low hours, those are things that I'm really, really interested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our team is helping you prepare this for Product Hunt, correct?
You are.
Tremendous.
Thank you.
There's other things people do sometimes, and maybe Hector, you can share more, because I know you have it and now think what's next. Some people launch social media campaigns, paid traffic to landing pages. Some people pay for paid articles or PR through different firms to amplify. Hector, what other things can people consider?
Yeah, apart from what you have highlighted, I think that given the type of product that Whee.li is, I think it's very important to get to those 100 users. That there's a lot of people that can be early adopters, providing feedback and becoming like the main ambassadors, right, of the product. I think that's probably something I would like to highlight, that, at this stage, everything starts more than ends. And it's more about listening to them, talking to them, understanding why they love the app, why they hate some interactions, and how to evolve the product in order to have a critical mass of the early adopters that can help you go beyond that number and also help you craft the final mile, right? Like in order to have like a very solid product. After that, I think that in this specific product, I think that Matt, he has a knowledge and a journey that is very interesting for understanding from the outside, and could be also very linked to the app in some way as a persona-led growth, right? That is very trendy nowadays, because people want to, the same that you mentioned before, Shane Parrish, Tim Ferriss, like even Sam Harris, at the end of the day, people follow other people in order to understand how to do better in different parts of life. And they trust them, and they accept, or they are comfortable testing what they say. And I think the connection between Whee.li and Matt Stein is amazing here, right? Because there's a very cohesive story, right? This is not just like, oh, I had an idea, I put it in the market. It's like, no, you're coming from a journey that is confirming that this app it's needed and people should try, right?
Yeah. It's funny. I come from an MBA background, and as you said, I was an environmental engineer. So there's a certain part of me that's geared towards getting to 100 users, right? But at the same time, there's another part of me that's, I guess, more altruistic. That's just like, you know what? If I can help a handful of people or a couple handfuls of people, like go through the transformation that I went through years ago, like that's real. That's very real to me. In fact, it's almost more real than 100 subscribers, right? So I have to somehow like check the metrics that really matter to me as well. So that's just something I think about as well in this journey of kind of where is this going?
Yeah.
Well, I'm delighted that it's available. I hope everybody loves it as much as you do and we do. Perhaps a final question to leave you with and to leave our listeners with. Thinking back to when you started this journey years ago, is there something that you would share back to yourself, some piece of advice or lesson before embarking on this journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely tell my younger self, and again, Hector, thinking back to the first question you asked me, Matt, how opinionated are you about this? I would tell my younger self, like, don't be very opinionated about this, right? Like be really open-minded about what this becomes, because at this point, it's not about me anymore, right? It's about the users and the impact that this has on them and the experience that they have. So, loosely hold the ideas, right? Those ideas are really important because that's like the DNA of what you're trying to impact, how you're trying to impact people, but like, don't be so attached to them, right? Be really open that people actually may experience the app in much differently than you have, right? So
I actually think that it's important to be probably strong on principles and vision for something, for a product, for a service, for a company. But then how do you achieve that? I mean, that shouldn't be written down from day one. It's something that you're going to be discovering through your journey, right? And be open to understand other points of views or other users using the product in a different way. If the goal is the same, if the outcome is the same, or even better, I mean, that's magic, I would say. The magic of putting a business in the market, right? That people are chaotic, and but also in a good way, right? So yeah, I'm aligned with that.
Well, I'll tell all of our friends to watch for us amplifying Whee.li on Product Hunt October. What's the date?
Oh gosh.
October-ish.
Yeah. Mid-October.
Find Whee.li on the App Store. People can also learn more at WHEE.li, Whee.li. Thank you so much for telling your story, Matt, for being a part of our community. And I thank everyone for listening today. We hope that you learned something new as we try to demystify the journey from 0 to 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.